Hello, this is Adam Watson at Watson EdTech. I'm here to talk about the adaptive learning system Dreambox, which is a math learning platform. We have had several teachers ask some questions about, especially from the overview, what is Dreambox trying to tell you through this dashboard as far as information? And there are some points that if you're not understanding how and the way that Dreambox works, it could be possibly confusing. So I'm going to spend a lot of time, most of the time on this particular video, on the first tab, which is Overview. And I guess I should point out that how I got here was I went to a class and then went to a particular student, and by default, Overview is the first tab that pops up. The next three are pretty obvious as far as what those probably cover, and I'm going to come back to Assign Focus in just a second. So when looking at this first overview part of the dashboard, first thing I want to point out is that this drop down is important because depending on what time frame you pick, you're probably going to see some numbers change, and you just need to understand why. It's not an error on the platform's sake, but if it's only looking at, for example, this week, which by showing these dates you can confirm that, you can see in the blue banner what has been happening this particular week inside of Dreambox. The blue banner is very useful. It's a great snapshot of what's going on with the student as of right now. So for privacy's sake, you'll notice a few points where the name is blurred out. Is the student using Dreambox enough? Well, in this week, they've been using it for 71 minutes, completed 15 lessons. They have yet to make a proficient standard, at least as of this week, and there are 2 standards they're currently in progress with. If I pull this back to 30 days or so on, probably the farther back and the bigger I make the time frame, you're going to notice those numbers here especially changing as far as the proficiency they've accomplished and so on. But again, we're only looking at this week. That's what the blue banner addresses. The alerts could be cautionary, it could be positive, and in this case it's a positive one saying that 5 or more lessons were done in the last 7 days, and according to Dreambox it's above the recommended usage. And of course that usage tab can give you more information about the total minutes per week or whatever that student has been working on. If there's any of the assigned focus, those personalized lessons you can push to a student, those assigned focus lessons would be appearing here. They could be long-term, as this one's showing, or possibly a short-term lesson. And the assigned focus tab is where you would go to look for more information about that or possibly push one of those lessons out. That information about assigned focus, there is much more about that in a quick start guide that I've created for our Shelby County District. So let's pay attention now to the graph, which seems to be kind of the biggest point of contention of trying to understand what this information is trying to tell us. First off, Dreambox is a K through 8 math system. We don't have any high school standards in here, so you can see the K through 8 here across the top. The number here is how many lessons occur in a particular grade level. So you can see the idea of this is that kindergarten, for example, only has 13 lessons total, whereas 4th grade is 25. The key thing to understand about the colors in the graph, it tells us a lot about what's occurring, not only for the student, but what Dreambox is set up to do for each grade level. So for example, in kindergarten, there's only 13 lessons possible total. And with that in mind, it actually, as you can see here, only 3 strands, these 3 strands right here, show up with any information as far as these 13 lessons only address these 3 strands. Where you see gray areas, like here and here, is an indicator that there are no lessons for that particular strand on that particular, for that particular strand, there's no particular Dreambox lessons. So, in showing this other picture, which gives you an idea of kind of if I scroll down and saw the other half of this, right? You can see that there are entire strands like expressions and equations that don't even show up until 6th grade. And that's very much on purpose and would make sense as far as, a math curriculum, building to complexity as you go up in those strands. Where it shows white could possibly mean one of 2 things. It could possibly mean that is work where there are lessons that exist in that particular strand, and it can give you kind of an idea, for example, that numbers and operations in base 10, those lessons end at the end of 5th grade. It also, as you can see here, seems to indicate some gaps where there were lessons in that particular strand and yet they weren't completed. And so the question for that is why, and try to articulate that. So Dreambox, being an adaptive learning system, makes decisions along the way. So for the system to work as it's supposed to, it's judging, engaging as the student does certain things, certain lessons, and gets proficient. At a certain point, based on which of those standards and how well they're doing and so on, as far as the proficiency, it says, you know what, you're good to go with this particular grade level and set of lessons, like you might see here for the number and operations in base 10. And at that point, would allow them to kind of move ahead, which in this case is why they're currently working somewhere here in terms of their current lessons that have to do with number and operations in base 10. So that's important to note. The second thing to note is that we may not be ready to skip ahead completely into the grade level that overall Dreambox thinks you should be at, but there could be gaps because when a student opens up their dashboard and they have some options of areas they want to work on, that is a little bit where there is that student choice. And what I'm suggesting maybe for this particular student, for example, is that there's probably some work to be done in geometry, but they simply haven't worked inside of that strand nearly as much as they've worked in some of these other ones. So where you see a gap, it's going to sit there basically unless and until the student finally gets back to that area and starts filling in on the geometry skills and taking the geometry lessons. If a student, or rather if a teacher looking at the student's progress says, you know what, I'd like to nudge them a little bit more, I'd like to address, say, this area that's a gap, it's a perfect opportunity to do an assigned focus. And I'll come back to this with the same idea. Yes, Dreambox is an adaptive learning system, thought that for numbers operations base 10, the student had done enough proficiency and enough lesson completion that it let them jump to that next grade level. But at any point in time, if you want to manually and personally assign some of those lessons that you think that they didn't get and shouldn't have got, should have gotten, then that's absolutely an opportunity for you to do that inside of Dreambox as a teacher to do the assigned focus lessons. So I'm hoping that gives a little bit of an overview of what that is showing us and making us realize that even though there may be some opportunities or moments where there are lessons to be completed, at least as far as what Dreambox has in its system, you may not necessarily complete every one of those or need to complete every one of those for the system to start pushing you to what they think is the next appropriate grade level. I'll end with this note. There's no way to toggle or force that or change that to say, I don't want it to skip, I want it to go back. The closest you could do to that, and what you have the power as a teacher to do, is you can basically reboot the system and force the placement to be at a grade level that you determine. So a teacher could take the student and say, you know what, I'm going to reset all of their data and all of their growth, and I'm going to force them to begin at the third grade level, and basically means they're starting all over again with some of these lessons. 2 points of warning though. Whenever you do that and you force a placement, you're erasing all the data. So all the things they did in the past are gone. So unless you printed it out or exported that data, it's gone forever. The second thing is that the system is still going to be adaptive and learning. So if the student quickly is showing Dreambox that I got this, I understand this, I'm proficient at it, at some point it's still probably going to make the same decision and say, you know what, let's just go ahead and move up to the next grade level and make that jump, which will still create the same situation that you may have been trying to avoid, which is that some lessons may, as it appears to be, skipped. So there's a little bit of faith and trust in that the adaptive learning system making those making that machine intelligence decisions to say that based on the speed and the accuracy and how and what particular standards perhaps even that the student is proficient in, it's making those decisions on what to do or what to skip or what to go ahead with next. And you have to kind of live with the faith of that. The assigned focus, however, does give you an opportunity to make some manual decisions while still accepting the placement and the levels that Dreambox is creating for you. I hope that addresses some of those issues. I hope it creates some clarity. Obviously, as always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. And thank you so much for your time.